So what we're looking at here are the stelae of Axum. And Axum is an ancient African trading empire that existed from the 1st to the 8th century and served as a hub for Hellenic, so Greek, Roman, Arabic, and African worlds. So what we see is a combination of traditional African, European, as well as Islamic influences on culture. And in 330, roughly, CE, Emperor Azana converts to Christianity. And at this time, coins are made that bear crosses, replacing a crescent or disc shape that had been on the coins previously. And Axum is the only ancient African state with written records within Africa besides Egypt. So Axum is near the Red Sea and the Nile. It's very wealthy. And it's the center of the Coptic Church since 510 officially. As I mentioned, in the 4th century, it's the only place in sub-Saharan Africa to mint coins. And by 520, Ethiopian Orthodox Church is very strongly established here. So in the 6th century, Christianity is the state religion. In the 7th century, there are Islamic conquests in the Near East and Northern Africa, but Islam is rejected by the Christian Ethiopians, and the Muslims are pushed into Somalia. So we have 2 dynasties, which is important. We have the Zagwe dynasty, and then we have the Ptolemaic dynasty. So the Zagwe dynasty is 1137 to 1270, and then the Solomonic dynasty is 1270 to 1974. And this dynasty starts because it overthrows the previous dynasty. And the reason that the Solomonic dynasty is able to overthrow the previous is because this dynasty claims to be a direct descendant from King Solomon. So for those of you who may be aware, King Solomon is a biblical figure who is said to be incredibly wise. He's the son of David. So if you have taken the Western art history class, or if you've ever attended church, you've probably heard of David and Goliath. So the shepherd boy who takes down a giant with a sling and a couple of pebbles. This is David, who grows to become a very important king in Israel, and Solomon is his son, and he's seen as very wise. And he's so wise that the Queen of Sheba comes to visit him. And according to the Ethiopian lore, the Coptic Orthodox Church, the Queen of Sheba and Solomon have a child together. And this is Menelik. This is their offspring. So it's a joining of Israel and Africa. And so Ethiopians see themselves as new Israelites, as the new Jerusalem. And they believe that Menelik brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia before Jerusalem was sacked by the Babylonians. And in fact, the Coptic Orthodox Church believes that the Ark of the Covenant is still in Axum, where it's cared for by a high priest and is never seen. So for those of you who are not aware, the Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, that movie is about searching for the Ark of the Covenant, which is this sacred box that is created by the Israelites, and sacred objects such as these stone tablets from Moses are placed in here. And this is something that a lot of power resides in, only the high priest can see. And anyone who inappropriately approaches or touches this can die simply because of the power of this object, and it was lost. So Coptic Orthodox Church believes that it in fact came to Ethiopia, and this transferred the legitimacy of the old Jerusalem, so Israel's Jerusalem, to Ethiopia, which is the new Jerusalem. And this is seen to protect Ethiopia. So actually, Ethiopia is the only African country that has never been colonized. It was occupied in World War II by Italy, but never actually colonized. And this is seen as proof of the power of the Ark. So what we're looking at here are stelae, and these stelae are commemorative. These are funerary monuments. Not that much is known about them, but these are very ancient. They're 3rd to 4th century. And you can see that these are massive, and there are many of them. And so what you're seeing here are ones that are still erect, as well as others that have fallen. So here in the background, you can see one of the fallen stelae. Let's see if I can get that off. Nope. Okay. Yep, some more fallen stelae. Okay, so what I'm really excited to talk to you about is Lalibela. So in the 13th century, Lalibela is seen as the site for the New Jerusalem. It currently has about 5,000 inhabitants, and it's a pilgrimage site that exists on a mountaintop. And Lalibela is unique in that it has churches, specifically 11 or 12. There's possibly a buried church made of solid stone. So this is very, very different from the type of architecture that we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing ground that you then build upon by stacking bricks, etc. This is the exact opposite. It is carved into the living mountain. Okay, so this is called a rock-hewn church. And so it's truly amazing. There are 11 known, and they were created within 10 to 30 years, all of them. Okay, so think about what this would take. So these are made, look at this. So you can see here the creation date is circa 1220. Circa means 5 years on either side, maximum of 10 years to build this church. Okay, it's the 13th century. Think about the kind of tools that you have. You do not have electric tools. You do not have diggers, none of that. You are carving into this mountainside, right? You're carving it out, and then you hollow out the church as well. And the way that these would have been created, obviously by hand, but you also cannot have candles or lamps, anything like that that has smoke in these enclosed spaces, right? So think about like in mines, right? They can't have things that give off a lot of smoke because that can lead to suffocation. So the way that they get light in this is that they would use polished bronze mirrors to reflect sunlight in order to carve. These are roughly, 40 feet tall, and they have these passageways into them. This is, it's mind-blowing. These are incredible. Maximum of 30 years to build 11 of these, 40 feet tall. This is the most famous. This is the Church of St. George. Okay, so you can see humans here for scale. All right. Just absolutely mind-blowing. And so, right, so this church would have been started here, and they would have dug all the way down. They would have carved into the mountain to create this, hollowed out the church, and they would have had to also make pathways down in. Some of these have windows, as you can see here, replicas of Aksumite palaces built roughly 200, 300 CE. Some are modeled on chapels and caves or the Hindu Buddhist temples in India. Most of them are square or rectangular, and they're shaped often like a cross, although here you can see this one is not cross-shaped, but you can see these columns, right? This decorative carving is truly, truly incredible. So what we're looking at here is the Church of St. George. And this is shaped like a Greek cross. So we think of a cross as being longer and then having a shorter bar through the middle. A Greek cross is evenly, it has even length of the up and down and the side to side. So this is a Greek cross, and it's very isolated. St. George was a Roman soldier who found a town in Romania where a dragon was tormenting the town, and the townspeople had offered the dragon animals, but then consumed all the animals, so they were feeding him virgins. And George tames the dragon with a crucifix and promises the town that he will slay the dragon if the town converts to Christianity, leading to the conversion of 15,000 people, hence becoming a saint, right? And he's the protective saint of Lalibela. And so in the 13th century, St. George appears to the king of Lalibela, and he complains that even though he's the patron saint of Lalibela, there's no church dedicated to him. And so Lalibela promises to construct the most beautiful church. And it's said that there's a hoof print in the floor from where St. George came to visit Lalibela. And one of the reasons that it's believed that these churches were built so quickly was that angels came during the night and they used the tools from the carvers to continue the work, which is why it took only 30 years to make 11 of these 40 feet tall churches. Okay, here you can see, right? Look at it. I have no words. Absolutely incredible. Think about the work that would go into this. This is not building up. Look at that. Look at, it's incredible. Okay, and then just very briefly, I want to touch on Ethiopian art in general. So this is not Ethiopian art that you're looking at here. It's a 13th century icon by an Italian artist. And Ethiopian art is very different from what we have seen, again, because it's a different religion, but it is also heavily influenced by the West. And so Ethiopian art utilizes a lot of the same aesthetic components as Byzantine art. They looked at icons from the West and they emulated that. So as I mentioned before, Ethiopia is on the Horn of Africa, which brings Christians to Ethiopia, vice versa, right? So there's a lot of exchange for artistic ideas. Like Western artists, and hopefully you learned this in your Western art history class, these these Byzantine icons, these depictions of saints and the Virgin Mary are not created this way because the artists lacked the talent and the skill to create naturalistic depictions. These are intentionally stylized figures. So what you see here is the Virgin of Vladimir, 11th to 12th century. And again, some commonalities is that they have some unnaturalistic proportions. They're very flattened. The faces tend to be highly stylized. And all of this is for very good reason. You have low literacy rates in the West at this time. And so people adopt these common visual vocabularies, right? That indicate things. And they also don't want to make Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary look too human, right? These are divine figures. And so by depicting them in this way, it sets them apart from mere humanity. And so this is a style that is emulated by Ethiopians, although obviously they put their own twist on it. It's not purely based on the icons. So Ethiopian paintings, there tend to be icons, manuscripts, and murals in churches. The subject matter has traditionally been almost exclusively biblical, and like medieval artists. These artists are typically unknown as they didn't sign their artworks. These works are created to honor God, not to honor the artist. And so signing the work is seen as arrogant. The extent to which European influences are incorporated into Ethiopian art has been entirely at the discretion of the Ethiopians. As I mentioned before, it's not a lack of skills, it's an intentional decision. These tend to be narrative and religious from the Bible. They tend to have very simplistic figures with these large almond-shaped eyes. Let me go ahead a little bit. So this is an icon. So these almond-shaped eyes, yeah, here we go. Very, very flat, very two-dimensional. There's a lack of depth. As you can see, they rely on things like hierarchy to indicate how important someone is, rather than things like perspective and overlapping bodies, right? These are intentionally flattened. They have these very flat planes of color to indicate modeling, and they tend to have very vivid colors. Many of these paintings were destroyed by Islamic jihads from 1531 to 43. And these jihads unfortunately destroyed churches and libraries and monasteries, but some survived in remote locations. So I said that Ethiopia is very hilly, and so some of these monasteries, etc., were protected by this. The colors are somewhat strictly prescribed, and this has to do with things like blue being associated with Mary. Again, this is not just Ethiopia. Yellow is used to express light, the salvation of Christ, etc. And there are two periods of religious painting. There is the early period, which tends to be very stiff, very geometric, and very hierarchical. So hierarchy has to do with the size of the figures, right? So here you see a great example of the saint being much, much larger than these figures who are reaching up to touch his robe. And Ethiopian icons are often in the form of these diptychs or triptychs. So a central panel with wings that fold over it, as you see here, or a two-piece panel, as you see here, kind of like a book. So these are very common. And you can see the similarities to the Byzantine art here, which is the Empress Theodora and her attendants in the Basilica of San Vitale. Okay, again, an icon, although here we're starting to see like the influence of the Renaissance, which is not necessarily something that is incorporated to a great extent in Ethiopian art. Here you can see the inner sanctuary of the church, this box, and it's very vividly painted, very vivid colors. There's more modeling. So although the chin is still marked out with a line, you can see that there's a little bit of a sense of shadow along the chin. And there's a little bit more layering, right? There's not as much of a sense of hierarchy in terms of the size of figures. And while the figures are still quite flat, they are somewhat more three-dimensional. And currently these artists do sign their work. So here you see St. George and the dragon, but look at his neck, right? You're seeing the fat rolls, which again, there is this tie to African art here. You're also seeing somewhat darker skin. You're seeing more natural hair textures. So these are not depicting European individuals, but these are in fact African. But here you can see, I'm guessing these are Islamic figures being trampled. But again, right, the gun, all of these things. So modernity, okay. So this very intentional decision to incorporate Western and African influences into this Christian African church. All right, that's it.